Hey guys, I'm really happy to welcome to the podcast Michael Reagan, president of the Reagan Legacy Foundation, son of President Ronald Reagan. And he's also a New York Times bestselling author, syndicated columnist, former syndicated radio host. By the way, the website is just ReaganLegacyFoundation.org. Michael, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. You know, there's a lot of division. Well, there's division in the country for sure, but there's also a lot of division in the Republican Party and a level of ad hominem skirmishing that's going on that reminds me of something that your dad once said, something that is sometimes known as the 11th Commandment. Talk a little bit about the 11th Commandment and what it says, what it means, but more broadly, how your dad viewed these kinds of differences.
Well, the 11th Commandment was, thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican. And he really believed that, during the campaigns in 1976, 1980, when he ran for governor back in 1965, 66, and 70, if you will. And it was really important for him, too. He could talk about issues, but never made those attacks, personal attacks. He didn't believe in those type of things. At the end of the day, what happens is, if you want to be elected as a Republican, you need to understand, you need to bring in the rhinos per se. You need to bring in those who are not in either party. You need to bring in those in the other party who, in fact, might be conservative or moderates. Because if you just count on Republicans to get elected, you'll never be elected to anything. And he understood that. So he brought up the 11th Commandment, didn't speak ill of other Republicans, even though they may speak ill of him. He laughed it off. He never returned fire, if you will, with fire. He returned fire with facts, returned fire with his great personality, his great love of America. At the end of the day, he wins going away in elections. Why? Because Republicans voted for him, rhino Republicans voted for him, those who didn't belong to either party voted for him, and Democrats voted for him. And that's why he won. And we have forgotten that there's other people out there listening to us when we are speaking.
This is a really, I think, important point on many levels. I mean, when Reagan ran against Ford in 1976, Ford represented the establishment. And to that degree, your dad was outside the establishment. He was an outsider. But at the same time, I don't think I ever heard him denounce so-called establishment Republicans. And then even later, when I was in the White House, there were a lot of conservatives who talked about, well, the moderate wing, which supposedly included people like James Baker and George Shultz, and the conservative wing, which supposedly included, Ed Meese. But I don't think your dad ever saw it that way. I think the way he saw it is you've got people who might have different perspectives who are advising him. It was his decision to make, but all these opinions were valuable to be factored. Am I correctly reading your dad on this?
Absolutely right. He listened to everybody, and every one of them will tell you they thought he was their best friend, or they believed that they were his best friend. He treated everybody equally, even though he may disagree with people on different issues. Let's take Grenada, for example. Has a meeting on Grenada. There's, I think, 10 people in the room. Should we go into Grenada? Should we not go into Grenada? So they took a vote. The vote was 7-3 not to go into Grenada. He was in the 3 to go in. So they all left the room. They thought, it's done. We voted not to go into Grenada. 3 days later, they're in Grenada. And one of the ones in the room called my dad on the phone and said, Mr. President, we had a vote on this. And the vote was 7-3 not to go into Grenada. And we went to Grenada. Why? He said, well, my vote canceled your 7.
Right.
It's real simple. But that's the way he acted, and that's the way he treated. So you couldn't go away angry at him and mad with that kind of an answer. And maybe it's because he was in Hollywood. Maybe it's because he was in the media. He understood it better than anybody else in the room. And today, we have a lot of people in the media, but I don't think they understand it.
So there's I mean, there were primary debates, and of course, there was a range of perspectives. So, George H.W. Bush was in there with your dad. He had different viewpoints from your dad. So you're not saying that there shouldn't be a vigorous debate about issues within the Republican Party, but you are saying that there is an element of tone that is important, and that if you strafe your own party the way you attack the opposition, then you're going to make some enemies that are lasting enemies. And of course, we've seen that happen in the Republican Party now. People sort of sink the knife into somebody else, and then they never forget it.
And they do never forget it. And you're going to need those people. At the end of the day, you're going to need every single one of those people to get elected. It's more than just winning the nomination. How are you going to win the general election? And if you stab people in the back all the way through the system and called them names and said things about them, it's hard to bring them on board. I mean, even in 1976, with my dad losing to Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford, 1980, and him winning the nomination, my dad, myself, my sister Maureen, all went out and campaigned for Gerald Ford. We were all there. What can we do to help? Can we go here? Can we go there? And we campaigned for Gerald Ford to win. And that doesn't happen so much today because we made so many enemies on the way to the nomination that those people don't want to help us get to the end result.
Very interesting thoughts to keep in mind as we go forward on this. Let's take a pause. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the Reagan Legacy Foundation.